In this video, I'm going to explain why Joe Rogan and Spotify are against Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and why they're not safe to be together. And by the end of this video, you'll understand a little bit more of Spotify's thought process and how you can apply this principle in your own life to make hard choices that can have a long-term benefit. If you're a college student, there's a free how to start your next semester strong. So please go ahead and check that out and give this video a like. So in this video, we have initially Spotify and Neil Young. So there's this, essentially what's going on here is Neil Young is not a fan of the misinformation that Joe Rogan has been sharing through his podcast. There's over 11 million listeners on his podcast, and Neil Young is basically saying, hey, I don't want to support this by having my music on the same platform. It's either Rogan or it's Young. And there's that quote. Yeah, 11 million listeners per episode. It's the world's largest podcast and has tremendous influence, and Spotify has a responsibility to mitigate the spread of misinformation on its platform, though the company presently has no misinformation policy. And the Spotify spokesperson confirmed to The Hollywood Reporter on Wednesday that the platform was taking down Young's music. So one of the things that is interesting too is this actually triggered another change. So now, in addition to Neil Young's music being removed, Joni Mitchell has actually just chosen to also have her music removed in support of Neil Young trying to fight against Joe Rogan. And again, so Spotify has removed Mr. Young's, and this, again, she's citing this same quote going on here. And essentially what's going on here, that like, even taking the vaccine or not out of that scenario, is it's interesting to me that Spotify is betting on the long-term value of Joe Rogan's podcast over these other musicians. Because from their perspective, they're saying in the macro, in the long term, they're an advertising company. And having a long-form podcast ends up being more valuable to them as a business model, and they're making that choice to lose the temporary win of Neil Young and Joni Mitchell, and saying, okay, we are okay with this temporary loss because of what ends up happening in the macro. And so why does this matter? And I was thinking back to a story when I was 15, I was playing drums, and at that time I had made this rule for myself, which was 3 by 3. And inside of this, it basically was just, I would practice 3 hours of drums by 3 p.m. And that was my rule for myself. I wanted to go through a certain amount of rudiments. I wanted to improve at this thing. And there were times where I would have my friends, my neighbors, or my siblings would be going to a pool, and I would inside be going like, oh my goodness, I wish I would have gotten this done earlier. But I'm willing to invest this time to grow this skill, even though I'm not sure of what the outcome is. Another time where this happened was in 2018, I got to work both at a church in Sacramento as well as do a kids camp in San Francisco. And within, I believe it was about 2 months, I made close to $6,000. And I remember thinking like, oh, okay, like I made all this money really quickly, and I have a choice of how I'm going to choose to manage that. Am I going to choose to save it and build my emergency fund, which is not the most like fun or sexy thing, or am I going to go and spend it on something, buy a car, or do something where it's like there's an immediate return? Well, what I chose to do was put that into an emergency fund, and it really just sat there for almost 3 years, which I realize inflation, maybe not the best thing, but what it allowed me to do 3 years later was when I wanted to go to Ecuador for 2 months, and I chose to quit the church that I was working at and the other job that I was at to be able to do that, it gave me that additional layer of being able to enjoy that experience that I might not have been able to do if I wouldn't have taken that loss, if you will, by choosing to put that into an emergency fund for the future. So that's really the main idea, the thing, the principle, the idea that I think we can take away from this, from what Spotify is choosing, regardless of where we land on the other things inside of this story, is what are the short-term losses or the short-term investments that don't make anything right now, but have a long-term, a positive to our lives. And that can be in all areas of life, in our faith, our foundation, our finances, our relationships, and our health. And go, what are the small things? Is it going to bed a little bit earlier? Is it making sure to memorize scripture so that way what's dominating our mind is the truth of what God says about us? Is it reading a book on personal growth or leadership or communication? Is it educating ourselves about finances and how to either develop a skill or do something different in our lives to make a budget? Whatever those things are, or even texting a friend and reminding someone that you care about that you love them dearly. That can be a great investment. And so whatever those things are, be sure to look at, okay, what is, even if this is a challenge short term, does it have the ability to be a long-term win? Because I think you're going to be happy with that result, and you're going to feel it internally, that peace and that ability to breathe. So if you've enjoyed this video, please go ahead and give this a like, as well as subscribe to this channel for much more content just like this. Adios.